Hi, I'm Bob,
And I'm Sherry.
and this is Mostly Politics with Bob and Sherry.
And today we have the pleasure to interview Dr. Zama, who is who is a candidate for Pennsylvania governor. Welcome, Dr. Zama.
Thank you. I'm very glad to be here. Thank you for this opportunity to fellowship with you and the folks out there.
Thank you.
Very nice.
Dr. Zama, you have a very compelling story, a true American dream. Can you tell a little bit about yourself and your journey to achieve what you achieved today?
Well, I always thank God because statistically speaking, I shouldn't really be sitting here today and talking to you, and above all, running to be governor of Pennsylvania. I was actually born in a little grass hut village in Africa where I was raised by two illiterate subsistence farmers. They were Christian farmers who were extremely strict and disciplined. And at about age 3, I went to elementary school and I was doing very well. I had to get up every morning from that grass hut and trek 5 miles through the woods and jungles to school, which I loved extremely. And my parents were highly supportive, even though they did not understand this entire concept of education. But my enthusiasm became infectious to them. And unfortunately, when I was 10 years old, I found myself standing at the bedside of my 30-year-old mother and watched her bleed to death as she cried out, "Son, go home, I'm dying." She had given birth. There was no doctor in a bush hospital. The only doctor was tied up somewhere in the province that day, and there was a nurse in the corner who was crying as well and saying, "There's no doctor, there's no doctor." So I pleaded with my mother not to die, and she died. And when I left that hospital room, I decided I wanted to be a doctor, and so no child would have to experience what I just experienced, and no parent would have to suffer like my mom had. And so I wound up. The villagers donated what amounted to $20. My father sold the farm, got $300, bought me a one-way ticket, and I showed up in New York City, a young teenager in North America, not knowing anybody, worked hard, and eventually went on to earn a bachelor's, a master's in management, a PhD in chemistry, and was trained at Harvard Medical School, educated to be a cardiothoracic surgeon. This is the greatest country in the world, and I'm a true beneficiary of that American dream that I want to make real for the people of this great Commonwealth.
So, Dr. Zama, in your biography, there was a period of time you were homeless. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. So when I arrived in America with $20 at JFK, and you can imagine $20 doesn't go a long way. And unfortunately, I got scammed out of that money by some nefarious character at the airport. And, I was young and innocent and ignorant of the ways in a new country, a new culture. And so another good Samaritan helped me out and gave me money. I was able to take a bus to my destination, which was Baltimore. When I got there at that point, and having exhausted the donation on bus fare, I had nothing. So I wound up at the YMCA downtown Baltimore, and they let me in, hoping that I will eventually pay. But the days turned to weeks, and I was crying every day, drinking water from the faucet, and I had nowhere to go. And then a college student from Morgan State College at that time, who was working at the YMCA, took interest in my plight, and he would bring me peanut butter jelly sandwiches on a daily basis. And then he went on the college radio station where he was a DJ, and he sent out a clarion call in Baltimore and asking if anybody would be willing to house a homeless kid from Africa. And about a couple of weeks went by, and a gentleman showed up. His name is Sam. And I was called downstairs, saw him, and all he asked is your name Enche Zama? And I says, yes. He says, get your stuff and come with me. He was a nurse anesthetist at Providence Hospital in Baltimore. He had a one-bedroom apartment. He bought a couch, a blanket, and a pillow. And he housed me for at least a year. And after that, I've gotten to know the society better, and a professor recommended that I move away from that college, which he didn't think was challenging enough for me. He was an Irish gentleman from Boston, And that's how I wound up in Boston to study chemistry and went on to Harvard to do my medical stuff eventually.
Well, so as an immigrant coming from a poor country, and as you mentioned before, statistically, you should not be here. To the young people that felt like they have no hope and no future in America today, what do you say to them?
Well, I say to them, it's that only when it's dark enough can you see the stars. There's always hope. And in America, challenges can very easily become opportunities because America has the commitment and the resources for individual advancement. And so, unlike many other places, geographies in the world, where hopelessness can become a low hovering cloud that chases you around the clock. In America, if you stay focused and you work hard, and you capitalize on the resources that this great nation has to offer, I believe that every single human being can make it. Just think, when I was in college in Boston, things were rough. I had two, three jobs. I worked at McDonald's, I worked as a housekeeper, I mowed lawns. I was constantly working. But if I look back at Africa, my continent of origin, and many other places I've traveled the world doing pediatric heart surgery as a missionary, operating for free and helping people around this planet. And everywhere I go, I look back at my point of reference being America and the opportunities here for our youth are not in those countries. And in those countries, the social structures are pyramidal. So there are very few rich up top. Most of the population down below is poor. And the chances for upward mobility are practically non existent in most of them. So for an immigrant child in America who's encountering constraints and challenges, I always say look at those as opportunities and think critically, talk to people, and just set yourself on fire because you'll be surprised what the resources around you are and the capacities within you are. And in my case, I'm a believer in God and faith. So I always stayed close to God and close to my faith in my struggle. It's not to say that I didn't have moments when I doubted myself and doubted the world around me. That's just normal human response. But so long as you keep that faith and you keep working hard in America, the greatest country in the world, you will be successful.
I want to follow up with this question. I'm sorry,
Oh,
Bob.
go ahead.
According to blackdemographic.com, and clearly you're a Black American, you're also a true African American. In 2016, 80% of the Black American voted Democrat in the presidential election. And out of that, 70% of Black American are registered Democrat. And you are a Republican, which is a minority in the Black American population. And why do you choose to be a Republican? What do you identify yourself with the Republican?
I embrace Republican values, which are really the values that undergird democracy and this nation as we've known it. And for many people, I like to remind them that historically, it's the Republican Party that emancipated the slaves in America. And most black folks in America were actually on the Republican side. And if we know historically, it was not till the early 60s, during the elections, when Martin Luther King was arrested in Georgia and his wife didn't know where he was. And when she reached out to Nixon for help, he didn't call her back. And she reached out to a young senator from Massachusetts called Kennedy. And he sent out a call and pleaded with the authorities to release Martin Luther King. And that year, in appreciation for his intervention, black folks came out in droves and voted for the Democratic Party. And that was good. But moving forward, a lot of programs that were geared towards social uplift targeted minorities and in particular African Americans. And unfortunately, this concept of giving total affiliation to a party was injected and became part of the DNA of African Americans. And in many ways, it has really destroyed those communities. Nobody wants to talk about it because it's very uncomfortable and has removed African Americans from the mainstream of American life. And so, what are the values that I'm a critical thinker? and I looked at the different parties after coming to America, and I looked at the Republican parties. Limited government, love of country, hard work, you know, a love of the American Constitution, I'm pro life, and all these values that are near and dear to me are values that undergird the Republican system or view or perspective. And that's why I'm a Republican. I believe that the problem in African American communities is that so many of them, nice people, great people who love their countries just like the rest of us do, unfortunately have been hypnotized by this whole political structure that has used vast swaths of African American communities, particularly for political ascendancy. And I will say it on every podium. And I says the ultimate emancipation is for people to reach inside them, visualize and question why, when you're born as a black child, your forehead, you automatically get a stamp that says Democrat, and ask yourself, what value has that brought to you? And it's economic empowerment, and it's something that the Republican Party preaches. A lot of discrimination and racism is grounded in economics. I sit here with you knowing that, yes, there are some people who may not like me, but what's more important at the end of the day is that, can I take care of myself? Can I take care of my family? And so a lot of black folks, unfortunately, have been used by others for political ascendancy and self growth, and have been ignored and left to wallow in mediocrity, inferior education, inferior neighborhoods, crime, this, that, and the other. So I embrace Republican values, and many, not just me, as I encounter traveling across the state, African Americans who realize, wow, we've been in the wrong arena all along. And so many of them, I'll tell you now, have switched over to the Republican Party to become mainstream America.
Dr. Zama, with all that you've accomplished, having the resources and the talent to do free cardiac surgeries in poor countries, why do you want to be governor of Pennsylvania?
I believe that this state is dying and it needs a doctor. And if you're really sick, you go beyond, you need a specialist. And so I've said time and again that Pennsylvania is sick, and it's so sick it needs a heart surgeon. And I don't say it in a sense to elicit laughter as a comedy or something. No, it's really factual. If you look at every pillar of our government, there's sickness. But the trigger actually came a couple of years ago as I witnessed the mismanagement of the COVID crisis. From the level of the governor's office on down to his representatives or assistants, Secretary of State and whatnot. And they were bumbling. The misinformation and confusion that has led to many of our children dying from suicide and mental illness being one of the most common causes of health disturbances in communities around our state. And in particular, I was involved in performing a procedure called an ECMO to save the life of a young woman in her 40s with children. And the impact of confused policies, mismanagement really hit me, and especially since this woman suffered tremendously during her hospitalization. And when I watched the governor fumble and I watched the Secretary of State fumble, I said to myself, there comes a time when silence is betrayal, and that time had come for me. I understand human suffering. I understand poverty. I've spent my life saving lives, serving at the highest level of excellence wherever I've worked across this Commonwealth. I'm also theoretically well trained to understand the dynamics of human life, not just as a scientist with a PhD, a physician, heart surgeon, but also trained in management. And I know one thing, that this state is so sick, it needs high performance teams to lead it out of the crevasse where it finds itself. And as a heart surgeon who's used to performing at the highest level of excellence and understands the value of high performance team, I decided to run to be a governor for our children.
On a high level, what were some of the things you would have done differently during COVID?
So, everybody understands who knows science and medicine that vaccine is an option. It's not the only thing to address a viral scourge. I tend to look at problems holistically. And when you see that the only thing that was being pushed by our leadership was vaccinations, while people continued to die, the vast number of our deaths were among the poor. And guess what? The vast majority of them were in the inner city. And then you look at the options. When a patient comes to a doctor with a problem, what do you do as a physician? You discuss treatment options. You discuss the risks and benefits of those options. That's the traditional algorithm in healthcare, of quality healthcare. What happened with COVID? No options. The disease or the scourge was not looked at with the same depth that you would do tuberculosis, a heart attack, cancer of the uterus. And why not? So you have people dying in the inner cities, and everybody knows that people living in the inner cities have the worst health. They have poor access to health care, quality care. They make the worst nutritional decisions. They have poor nutritional options in those communities. They, economically disadvantaged communities. And we know that God gave us something called an immune system. And we know that if you and I are under tremendous stress, what happens? Our immune systems are suppressed. Have you ever been under stress and you notice you get fever blisters, you catch a cold, you're under tremendous, that's because that reduces your immune system. Yet, a viral scourge arrived, and our leadership, all you heard was fear, fear, fear. Fear-girded leadership. And think about the implications. We're suffering under a viral scourge, and everybody's promoting fear. And the very immune system that we need to protect us is under attack. And what does the immune system need? Proper nutrition, right? Stress management, right? And all these things to keep it going and be vigorous to protect you. God gave us that. It's just like in America. What protects America? When I say protects America, you think about the Marines, Air Force, Navy, an arsenal of nuclear weapons, this, that, and the other. Well, the body itself inside has its own weapons to protect it. And so that's a perspective that was missing. And now you see we have 2 years window of opportunity where a governor who has a powerful podium could have pushed a more holistic approach to this virus and engaged the population. We lost that opportunity and we would have reduced so many deaths across the state. That was a big mistake. And what else? Because of mismanagement along the way, our children have suffered the worst. Children in, I call them, in regions with zip code disease, in poor areas. Homeschooling, a new concept. Education was turned upside down. And those kids didn't have access to internet or reliable internet broadband. Unlike kids in Montgomery County, Bucks County, more privileged zip codes. And so now we're going to be talking about not just the educational gap, achievement gap, but an educational achievement canyon between the economically disadvantaged and those who are not. Even people up in Coudersport, South Sullivan County, who've been suffering for years without broadband access. And so you see how poor leadership decisions, inadequate, optimal leadership does not geared toward humanity, can lead us down this terrible path of disaster, and it did during COVID. And we could continue forever discussing various pillars of our lives under the leadership of the governor of Pennsylvania, where we've been failed miserably.
So, you mentioned about healthcare, and it's the second biggest issue of your campaign listed on your website. And the healthcare has been a big topic since Bill Clinton was president. What do you think that's wrong with our healthcare system, and do you have any plan to fix it?
Yes, I've been in the healthcare industry in leadership positions for decades. I understand the system very well. It's one of the most complex industries in America and the largest. It accounts for the lion's share of our annual budget. Almost one out of every $5 or 20 cents out of a dollar goes into healthcare. Over $4 trillion. It's massive, more than the GDP of most countries on our planet. And so it is something that is complicated with many moving parts. But in the final analysis, healthcare should be something that brings what? Meaning and value to the people of America, and more specifically to the people of Pennsylvania. People need reliable, affordable, quality healthcare. Those three things. That's it. But if you travel across this state, as I've described in the campaign, and I've known for years and discovered even to a higher, more pathetic level, there are parts of this state that I refer to as pharmacy and hospital deserts. And just today I was on a Zoom call with McKean County, where access to healthcare, surgical interventions is almost not available. Pike County. And this is 2022. So access has been a problem. But we can relieve that. Guess what? With artificial intelligence, with a digital revolution where the rest of the world and the nation is, Pennsylvania is still a lagger. So when you talk about things like, telemedicine, which can fill a huge gap that's now existing in our healthcare system, there are vast swaths of our state, of the 6 or 7 counties in this state, that do not have access to telemedicine. And guess what you need to be able to actualize telemedicine? Information technology, broadband, which we don't have. So as governor, I will make sure that every single county in Pennsylvania, and as a scientist, we will have timelines set, not only that, performance metrics and measures to be sure that the people in this state who've suffered long enough have access to that, so that they may not be geographically close to a facility, but they're electronically enough close that a doctor in Pittsburgh, in Philadelphia, in Allentown, in Erie, or somewhere close, even in Williamsport, they can have access to address their issues. And then we will have people to have access to healthcare facilities within less than an hour's drive of where they live. We can do that. Medicine has changed and evolved in some ways good, but in many ways bad, because it's moved away from the very essence of healthcare, the people. I've been in this business for decades. I want to bring medicine back to the people and put them front and center. So all these conglomerates that we see across the state who are buying up facilities and shutting down some of them because of for economically motivated reasons, well, I'm going to have to talk to them and remind them why they exist, that they exist not for themselves, but for the patients. I'll be a very powerful advocate for quality healthcare, accessibility, availability for the people of Pennsylvania.
On the economy, we're facing inflation, 40-year highs in inflation. Gasoline prices are very high. And in Pennsylvania, we have some of the highest gas taxes. What do you see as some of the root causes to inflation, gasoline prices, and what could you as governor do about it?
Policies, leadership that's disconnected with the ones they serve. And that's the leadership that I say, not euphemistically, self-serving. And I speak categorically and authoritatively as a heart surgeon and as a humanitarian. I spend my life serving. And leadership that serves special interests, not the people. When you grab a scalpel as a heart surgeon, you own the outcome. When you grab a scalpel, you have one chance to do it right. And most of all, when you grab a scalpel, your primary motivation and focus is the ones that you serve. And not only that, everybody's focus around you, a high performance team that you set up, is to the ones that you serve. That's missing in our government. And so our policies, if you look at things like energy policies, contribute to the inflationary uh, uh, situation that we find ourselves in our infrastructures across the state, from Erie to Philadelphia and from Bradford down to Montgomery. And so when you look at why are we an $800 billion economy, GDP? Pennsylvania, twice that of Saudi Arabia, by the way. We're richer. And we've got more energy reserves than Saudi Arabia, by the way. If we were a country, we'll be number 4 in the world. Think about that, let that sink in. And if we were a country with our GDP, we will be 16, 17, 18, or 19, depending on the vagaries of global economies, and especially with COVID and how that's transformed global economies. So we're not a poor nation. We're not a poor state, excuse me. We're just not managed well. And that's a fact we need to start facing. We're not poor. And so we have opportunities to grow this economy to a $1 trillion economy in a few years. And let me explain why and why that's important. We have not exploited ecotourism. I've traveled all 6 or 7 counties. As a matter of fact, people say I'm the most hardworking person running for office now. Yes, I was the first one to have visited every county in the state, and many of them 3, 4, 5 times, 6 times, some of them. It's a beautiful state, the most beautiful in the Commonwealth and in the United States. We have not. I'm going to be the governor that carries the banner for ecotourism and attracts people around this world. I've traveled around the world extensively. We've not exploited medical tourism. And I'm talking about not chump change. These are billions of dollars, these industries. And guess what? We have massive economy here in Pennsylvania. Agriculture is about $183 billion annual. Employs about 500,000 people. Energy, with all our resources that our crazy policies have prevented us from exploiting. We can do that and protect our environment. And if you can do that and apply efficient fiscal management to our government, having checks and balances, performance measures in every pillar of our government, the way I ran cardiac surgery, you would imagine how revenue will flow in this state. And guess what? And then we can address many of our infrastructure problems. And guess what? What undergirds all that is a world-class educational system. And we're number 50, as you know. We're failing. So I'll be the governor that preaches that excellence trumps all these other measures we keep pushing. Diversity, this, that, and the other. No. I want my children, as they did, my children have doctoral degrees and stuff, to espouse for excellence, to embrace excellence first, and everything else next. And if we do that, we provide vocational schools. Not every child needs to go through the classic pathway of high school to university. Many of our children need to go to vocational school. We need plumbers, welders, electricians. And you can make a better living sometimes doing that than going on to spend 8 years pursuing a PhD degree in music or whatever you choose to do. That's an individual thing. And I will have a vocational school within an hour's drive of every county. And all these things conjoined, you can begin to see how we wouldn't be in the mess we are today financially, because we'll be awash with revenue enough to responsibly meet all our infrastructure issues in in Pennsylvania. And by the way, I speak 6 languages fluently. I've traveled the world more than any candidate running. I speak Spanish, Portuguese, French. I can go on fluently. I've traveled to those countries. I performed medical missions there, lectured there in their languages. And I'm not a provincial thinker. I consider myself a conservative, compassionate, critical thinker. I want to open new markets overseas for our products, energy and agriculture and industry. And just think about the revenue explosion that could generate. By the way, a lot of developing countries, you got 1.5 billion people in Africa and hundreds of millions in South America, evolving economies. Guess what one of the major constraints to economic growth is? Energy. We've got it here. Agriculture. We've got it here. We're a giant. We've got to start thinking different and expecting different types of leadership. This conventional thinking, this provincial thinking, it's not going to take us anywhere. And we're in a global knowledge economy. The leadership we used to embrace in the past belongs in the past, not today.
So, as a physician, I have to ask you this question. Just yesterday, Pennsylvania House passed a bill, HB 972. It's a Fairness in Women's Sports Act, which separates athletes by sex at birth and not their changed identities. It's a bipartisan bill. It passed 115 to 84. Some of the legislators on the Democrat side felt this can cause psychological harm to the transgender woman biological male. What are your thoughts on this issue from a physician perspective?
Gender is biology. We're trying to inject some kind of warped science, pseudoscience, into the minds and hearts of our children and fellow Americans. I'm a scientist with a PhD. And it's not just a degree that I have. It is the responsibility that society puts on my shoulders because of that knowledge and how I use it. I'm a physician. I'll never do anything to betray the trust of the public in me and the people, because my knowledge, my intelligence, my experience has to be used in a way to bring value to the ones I serve or the people in the world. Otherwise, it's been in vain and I'm self-serving. Why is it that we embrace gender changes and accept the fact that a male who decides to be a female now qualifies holistically to be a female and can participate in female sports? Yes, if it's going to cause anger and despair in those who have changed their sex because they're not allowed to participate with the opposite gender at birth. Well, think about that, what that does to, if I use the example of a male who's transformed themselves anatomically to a female, think about the other side. How do you feel as a woman when a man all of a sudden is competing with you and all they've done is to alter their anatomy, but they have the natural advantage, physical advantage over you, and the biochemical advantage? Gender is biology. Whether or not you perform plastic surgery, which is what it is, and maybe some chemical transformations with hormones, fundamentally your genetic makeup and your genetics determine how your body functions, my brothers and sisters. You're still male. And so it's a terrible advantage that you have interacting in a competitive environment, sports, with others of the opposite sex. We're taking perfectly healthy young men and women and turning them into lifelong patients. And in the final analysis, after we go home, we don't realize, I'm a doctor, all those children have lifelong psychological burdens they have to carry with them and they have the highest incidence of suicide in their cohort. This is a problem that society needs to think about as they make their decisions, whether with our policies or with our attitudes. Therefore, I don't support anybody from uh, who participates in sport events with those that are not of their original biological gender, and I support the legislation that has been passed.
You mentioned God several times. Can you describe how your faith sort of informs your positions and how you integrate that into your decisions in your life?
When I grew up in a Christian family where God was at the center of everything we did and every decision we made in that grass hut. I went to missionary schools, and I was educated by missionaries, men and women of God from England, America, from all over the world, India, China, wherever. And so that's all I've ever known in times of challenges on a daily basis, what guides me. I'm a guy who prays before an operation as a surgeon and pray with my patients. So I believe in God. I believe that we're all God's children, no matter what our hues and our complexions are. In the final analysis, as God's children, we have to work together to make this a better world. And I will never embrace any other philosophy than this. And so I'm proud to say that I'm a Christian, I'm a believer in God, and I believe that the influence of God in our lives is very crucial and it's a determinant on the quality of life that we live.
Okay, Dr. Zama, just one more question. The Republican governor primary race is a very crowded field, and you're currently trailing single digit, and you continue to stay in the race. What do you think your ultimate winning strategy would be?
So we're making tremendous progress. And when you look at his polls, really, you can manipulate the statistics any kind of way. We've got a candidate who paid a polling agency, and they came out on top. Yet I don't see him in the campaign trail, and they call him a no-show. My campaign is grassroots. We have tremendous support. I won the caucus in the Northwest and Northeast, north of I-80. And so, and I won caucuses in the south of I-80 as well. And so that's what our campaign is grassroots. I'm the only candidate who can win in November. Everybody keeps talking about May. Think about it. Look at every candidate who's running. The press will crush them, and they cannot beat Josh Shapiro. I'm the only guy who can win it. And some of the candidates have said the person to beat Josh Shapiro is somebody who's the exact opposite. Well, guess who's the exact opposite? I'm the only one who can build this party and grow it, and I'm already doing that. There's 600,000 more registered Democrats in this state than Republicans. You cannot win as a Republican if you can't attract a significant chunk of the of Democrats. And I'm the only one who can go anywhere into Democratic enclaves and anywhere in our big cities, and I have. Many of the other candidates avoided. So in the final analysis, May 17th is crucial. And let me explain what. We have lost the past two gubernatorial elections. We're promoting candidates. One of the candidates spent $17 million and was crushed by 17 points. We have not learned, and we're continuing to promote the same type of individuals, not realizing we will definitely lose. And I am the ultimate package deal for the Republican Party. And many people recognize that. As I travel the states, the rank and file Republican, the constituents look at me and they say, you're the only one who can win in November. They recognize something. And so I'm not worried about the statistics. I'm not worried about the polls. The only endorsement I need is the people of Pennsylvania, not some famous star or some famous politicians. And I'm the only one who has leadership experience. I've been tested, not just with a microscope, an electron microscope. And like I said, if you look at my qualifications, not academic qualifications, no, not necessarily, but human service, leadership, excellence, and outcomes, I exceed any of the other candidates. And so if the Republican Party wants to win, yes, then I should be the candidate that's promoted and supported to win May 17, because then we'll win in November.
Thank you, Dr. Zama. And our time is limited, but after the primary, will you come back again to do another interview with us?
Oh, I would absolutely love that because after the primary, I'm going to win the primary, and then I will be really trying to spread the gospel across all factions in the state. And I've really enjoyed meeting the two of you, and I would be delighted to participate in another interview when given that opportunity. Yeah,
Thank you, sir. It's been an absolute pleasure.
yeah, my pleasure too, brother.